And that ball is stroked. Gone! Oh my goodness, on a frozen rope.
Throw in there on one hop. Out!
What?
Oh, he hosed him.
Hop steps, great dump off, and a two-hand jam. And welcome back for episode 23 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. If you're new to the show, the intro sound bites are from a bunch of my favorite highlight clips that I've made with my commentary. As football season's almost upon us, I can all but guarantee I'm going to have some new stuff for you real shortly on the intro between all the high school and college football I'm going to be covering. Now, last week and the week before, we had an epic, if I do say so myself, two-part episode for the MLB Hall of Fame tier list. I had my fellow commentator on, Jaden Taylor, as well as Eli Maldonado-Ortiz, two guys I got to spend this summer working together with for the Kalamazoo Growlers baseball team. Now, I make no exaggeration here when I say I thought that was the finest episode we've ever made here. The depth and the breadth of the content was just something I've never expected guests to bring, but seriously, those guys crushed it. Huge shout-outs to them. Having a strong opinion, that's got to be just one of the best ways to be naturally entertaining. As always, now that the pondering and philosophy section of the episode is done for the day, can we talk about sports? Good news about the NFL. We finally have some half-decent insights into the top preseason quarterback battles. Let's talk about the most interesting ones now. Some guys are still looking to make that last impression. Some guys took the reins right away on day one. Some guys might just have to ride that emotional roller coaster this year. I'm going to start with the Minnesota Vikings and some of the most unfortunate camp stories throughout the league this year. Their 10th overall draft pick, J.J. McCarthy out of Michigan, already out for the season. He tore his meniscus in a preseason game and just decided on surgery over that waiting game. He's already moving on to 2025. Speaking of that 2025 season, I feel like you already have to put him on that comeback player of the year watch. That's how good that I think his attitude and his work ethic is, regardless of what you think his talent or his ceiling is as an NFL quarterback. The aftermath of that injury with the Vikings is that Sam Darnold is now their starter. Think about letting your grandpa get behind the wheel of a Bugatti, right? Do you really think that car is going to be driven up to its potential? That's this year's Vikings offense. Everyone in the media had already said that Sam Darnold was way ahead in the race during camp, but now they have no choice. Every good veteran quarterback that was out on the streets or was on the fence about retiring, they're all gone. They can't call on Case Keenum, Josh Johnson, Colt McCoy, Nick Foles, Matt Ryan. Every single one of those guys retired this year. I actually could probably do an entire episode on each one of these guys maybe in the really wild story arcs that they've gone on in their careers. In fact, I should do that someday with an active guy like, let's say, Josh Dobbs, Matt Castle, or Brian Hoyer. So what have I not already said about Sam Darnold? His accuracy is just not good. I've called him a gunslinger. I've said he's a little less athletic than you like, a below-average decision maker. I predicted in the first quarterback battles episode that I did that Kevin O'Connell, the Vikings head coach, and their whole staff would start Darnold, and they would get fed up by something like week 8, maybe earlier. Not anymore. He might have to start all 17 games, and the Vikings are going to be in major trouble. They did just sign 2024 UFL champion Matt Corral to be their fourth quarterback option, along with Nick Mullins and Jaron Hall. He might end up playing his way all the way up to the number 2 QB spot. There really are a lot of NFL caliber players in the UFL, which makes perfect sense because a lot of them did play in the NFL at some point. But I don't think a single one of those QBs on the Vikings roster gives you any confidence. The NFC North is unironically loaded now, and the Vikings have to be careful if they don't want to be the laughingstock. Next up, we move along to the Denver Broncos quarterback situation. It's official. Bo Nix is now the first Broncos rookie quarterback to start on day one since John Elway. That's wild. He has probably been the best overall player this preseason, not just quarterback. I don't know if anybody wants to argue that, but the numbers are ridiculous with all of these, typical preseason caveats kept in mind. He's not playing against starting defenses yet. He's not playing a full 4 quarters. That said, he's 23 out of 30 throwing the ball. That's 77% for 206 yards and 2 touchdowns to no interceptions. The Broncos have scored points on every drive but one that he's played in 2 games, only failing because of a fumble from a tight end. Nix has below average weapons and is utterly balling. I think it would be a whole different animal playing 60 minutes for many, many weeks in a row, but he might end up being the steal of this whole draft for a guy who was picked 12th overall. The rest of the Broncos quarterbacks, well, Zach Wilson is getting some reps, but if you ask me, he's most likely to be the number 3 option. There's also Jarrett Stidham. He definitely has not played well in this, again, super small sample size, 11 of 18, 102 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. I really believe, though, that Stidham has the better physical tools. He's a bit bigger, stronger, and slightly more accurate, at least, than Zach Wilson, though that's not saying much. Neither of these guys have really played well ever since they've come into the league, though, to be clear. There are precious few backup quarterbacks that you can really feel good about if they get in the game, and I assure you, none of them play for the Broncos. If you ask me, though, I do think they need to play Bo Nix for a whole year. And fun fact, Bill Belichick actually recently said as much on the Pat McAfee show. Now, I am ignorant, but I'm not nearly ignorant enough to claim that I know anything compared to Bill Belichick. His take was that Denver should only start Bo Nix if they know that he's ready to take over that mantle right now. He said the last thing they would ever want to do is turn away from him and have to go to Jarrett Stidham or even Zach Wilson after a handful of games. Another thing, too, if they were going to do that, then why use your first-round pick this year on a quarterback at all? They definitely could have used one of the dozens of impact receivers or offensive linemen, even edge rushers. There were tons of other great players, and you could have taken a quarterback later. Bottom line, the Broncos' defense is pretty much intact, besides, of course, all-pro safety Justin Simmons. He finally signed with the Falcons last week. That saga was crazy, and he was one of the best unsigned players that I've seen go that long. Denver's defense is good on a number of levels. They have some true studs, but you really don't want to watch this Broncos offense in a primetime game of any kind unless Bo Nix plays like the offensive rookie of the year. Is that super likely? Do I think that he's going to win it? Not really. But do you know who I think will? All perfect segues aside, now on to the Washington Commanders. You will never believe this. They drafted the Heisman winner, who had the greatest statistical season for a Heisman winner ever. They took him 2nd overall. His best competition was gray-haired journeyman Marcus Mariota, and in their infinite wisdom, the Washington Commanders named Jaden Daniels their starting quarterback. There really should have been more riots in Washington if this didn't happen. He's also playing really well in the preseason, just like Caleb Williams, who we'll talk about a little bit later on. He had a tough rushing touchdown in his first game. It was exactly the kind of play where he can make a huge difference. It's this read option that looked reasonably well defended on a 3rd and goal from the 3-yard line. Then Daniels just hits his top speed so fast, absolutely dusts a safety who's flying downhill that started off with a good angle. Quarterbacks that can outrun defensive backs, I'm not saying that they're guaranteed to succeed, but I will say it's a really unique skill set that only a handful of guys in NFL history have ever had. Now, more disclaimers here. I'm not a quarterback guru by any means, and I totally know that. When I give a disclaimer, quarterback's usually the first position that I would think about doing it for. What I do see from Jaden Daniels so far, as a passer, is mostly awesome. I think his feet are good, no touchdowns, but no interceptions so far. And why would you play him any more than that, especially when your mind is already made up that he's your starter? I think the number one thing that stands out on tape, his arm strength on throws outside the numbers already looks elite. He's hit an out route and a comeback route that made me audibly say, wow. The corners had the right leverage and tight coverage on both plays, and he just put the ball down and away perfectly. Bo Nix has the better numbers. He's also played a little bit more, but as it stands right now, this was the easiest quarterback decision of all of the NFL training camps. I would also currently be shocked if anyone else besides Jaden Daniels wins the Offensive Rookie of the Year. Now to the biggest enigma left on the board, I would argue, the New England Patriots. I have never said that before in my entire life, by the way. Just let that sink in for a moment. My entire lifetime, the Patriots have never once been in a situation like this where they were this bad and had so little hope. This year, they obviously shouldn't be good. They had an above-average defense by a little bit, but arguably the most putrid offense in the league. For the first time in a long time, too, their special teams were a joke. They had a rookie kicker, Chad Ryland, who just could not put it together. They were so bad on special teams, it arguably lost them a couple of games that they could have won. They were terrible last year, but is there any way that they win less than 4 games? I don't know. I really don't see many areas, though, in which they got any noticeably better, and that's the biggest problem. They haven't made a decision still between third overall pick Drake May and veteran Jacoby Brissett at quarterback. I don't know that I would have let this one go this far down to the wire. Think about both of them on the field. Drake May definitely hasn't hurt his case at all, but my guess is this is going to be the closest race in the league. Think about Gerard Mayo, their new head coach, right? He is in probably the most unenviable spot of any new head coach this year. He has to make that quarterback choice. He has to try and revive this entire franchise that's been so proud and has won so many games since 2000. He has to replace 6-time Super Bowl winner Bill Belichick. Gerard Mayo himself has said that Jacoby Brissett's still taking the bulk of the reps with the ones, but he's not 100% sure if he's the day one starter still. I love experience, you love experience, and I've been vocal in saying that Jacoby Brissett is a good player. Drake May's ceiling, though, that is the question. Of course his floor is low. Of course those kind of not-so-hot mechanics could come up and bite him, and Jacoby Brissett is nothing if not consistent. What do the Patriots do? Honestly, I think it is a complete coin toss, and if you have any insight, let me know. One more quarterback battle that was very recently decided. Gardner Minshew over Aiden O'Connell for the Las Vegas Raiders. I had predicted this one because why would they give him anything beyond backup money to come over from the Colts if not? Still, the only numbers I need to describe Gardner Minshew. 59 touchdowns to 24 interceptions in 37 career starts. Absolutely fantastic. Numbers can be a little bit deceiving, but he just is not bad. The value that they're going to get out of that contract should be fantastic. 2 years and $25 million. They didn't draft a quarterback this year. And Aiden O'Connell, to his credit, was definitely not terrible last year, especially in the second half. So I'm sure that they don't hate the thought of keeping him around. Remember, O'Connell's going to be 26, though, on September 1st. He should be pretty far along physically and mentally for a second-year guy of that age. I'm all but certain O'Connell is going to get some playing time this year. And if the Raiders are out of the playoff race, I would say he probably starts some games down the stretch. What do you have to lose? They still have plenty of cap space. I know it feels far away for the Raiders, but they really aren't that far at all from getting over that hump, being, say, 9-8, 10-7. Question becomes, you play in the same division as the Kansas City Chiefs. You have to play them twice a year. Can you avoid getting smoked in those games? Maybe steal one and use that to work your way into the playoffs. So those are the updates on most of the current NFL quarterback battles. There are some other camp stories that I'm going to now transition into, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention a few of those, so I'll relatively rapid fire them. Technically, you could identify a couple of other teams that might have multiple quarterback options, but I don't see any controversies. Obviously, I'm leaving out number 1 overall pick Caleb Williams with the Bears. He cost them essentially the rest of their franchise and draft rights for like the next decade, so he better be the starter. The Steelers could technically go with Justin Fields over Russell Wilson, but there is no chance that that happens if you ask me. I think Russ is probably a future Hall of Famer, and Justin Fields just has too many accuracy and decision-making concerns, although his rushing ability is awesome and a lot of fun. This next story is kind of funny, if you will, but it's not overly impactful to the league landscape. The embattled wide receiver Chase Claypool was in camp with the Bills this year, but got a turf injury that they had put him on IR for. They released him with an injury settlement on August 15th. That means he gets to come off injured reserve, which is actually really cool. Plus, I'm sure he gets a little bit of money for that. And then he'll be free to sign with someone else whenever he can pass a physical. This will now be essentially Claypool's 5th team in 6 years in the league. And last year, he caught 8 total passes for 77 yards in 12 games played. Curious, isn't it, that he causes problems everywhere he goes and yet continues to get chances everywhere? Some of the other holdouts and contract situations going on right now are truly unbelievable. I've had a bunch of other fun episodes and guests and things to talk about recently, but there are 2 of these that just I cannot ignore anymore. They're blowing my mind. They are some of the absolute best guys at their position. They're on the same team, but I think they have a little bit different outlooks. I refer, of course, to Trent Williams and Brandon Ayuk with the San Francisco 49ers. It just does not happen like this to such a steady organization, one that's in the playoffs every year and usually one of the top Super Bowl contenders. This is another case where I cannot pretend to know what the team is thinking. So first, consider Trent Williams. He's a 36-year-old left tackle, obviously much older, and most guys don't make it that long. But he's made literally 11 straight Pro Bowls. That's tied for the most ever by a tackle. 3 straight first-team All-Pros. He's one of the best overall players in the league. He has not declined at all with age, and this past year was arguably his best one yet. He was voted number 7 on the NFL Top 100 list, however much you value that. Remember, he was a boss for his first 9 years in the league with Washington, and then he was traded to the Niners back in 2020. His current deal with the Niners was signed in 2021, that year after. The value of the contract they gave him at the time was enough. It was $23 million a year, but that's not enough anymore. It's partially a matter of respect. He's one of the league's very best players, the top player at his own position, and he only needs 1 to maybe 2 extensions before he retires. You can go year to year even if you have to. Let him be the highest paid tackle in the league until he retires. That title currently goes to the Bucs' absolute behemoth, Tristan Wirfs, but it would mean just over $28 million a year. That's where the target is. As of today, the Niners have the most cap space in the entire league and one of the best rosters. The final salary cap number for this year will even be more than that number currently shows because you factor in that rosters haven't been trimmed. They're still paying 90 guys right now. Now to the Niners receiver, Brandon Ayuk. It's a strange case for entirely different reasons for him. I actually don't know that he's the best receiver on his own team. I prefer Deebo Samuel, the way that he runs so hard after the catch and he can play running back. He's a little bit of a better blocker. But the stats for Ayuk last year were phenomenal. 1,342 yards, 7 touchdowns, 18 yards a catch on only 75 catches. He's given you 4 incredible years so far. Your Super Bowl window is utterly wide open, especially with Brock Purdy still on that rookie deal. You have the salary cap to get this deal done, and yet they still insist on looking for all these different trade partners, one of them being the Steelers? I don't get it. I would really prefer they just save us all of the drama and give him a very close to top-tier, multi-year deal. I know that he isn't better than the Vikings' Justin Jefferson or the Dolphins' Tyreek Hill, right? But I think he is definitely in that second tier of wide receivers just below those guys right now. I think 3 years at $80 million, 4 years at $110 million, something like that. I think that's totally fine. And you should be willing to take that as a player to help your team win the Super Bowl. It's really not that much of a pay cut, is it? I don't think the Ayuk deal is going to set any records, but it will give you some insurance and another chance to sign a huge contract while you're still under the age of 30 if you play really well during that deal. The media, the team, and everybody else has already wasted a bunch of time and hot air on this nonsense. Let me reiterate that the 49ers have the most cap space in the entire NFL, and they're waffling over 2 great players at ultra-important positions. Why? Speaking of great and important players, I cannot leave CeeDee Lamb off of this list. This one is just maybe the most bizarre story of all. You know that thing that the Cowboys do every year where their roster on paper looks amazing and then they play really well for the entire regular season and they're one of the top teams and then can't do anything in the playoffs? Do you know how I would go about breaking that cycle? How about signing the best receiver from the second half of last year to a huge contract? While researching this episode, by the way, I just found out that his legal name is Cedarian DeLeon, and that's where you get the CD from. That is awesome. That's just a little side note, but this guy's played 66 career games. He has 32 touchdowns, over 5,000 yards, and last year alone, 1,749 yards, a dozen touchdowns on 135 catches, 181 targets. Nothing about that makes sense. In a normal season, he would have easily been the Offensive Player of the Year. He was a first-team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler, as you might imagine, but he probably deserved more MVP votes even. There's tons and tons of talk about, does Jerry Jones even want him back? Does he think he's being too much of a diva? Is he asking for too much money? Who cares? Do you ever want to get over that hump? Do you ever want to win multiple playoff games, get to a Super Bowl, let alone win one? You should probably pay a guaranteed top 3 receiver in the league. CD's only going to be 25 this year. I understand that we see the market resetting constantly right now for receivers, for quarterbacks, for edge rushers, a couple of other important positions. That means this is just the game that you have to play. Knowing how young he is, you could argue maybe he should sign a longer-term deal, something in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 years, although the trend has been towards 3 or 4 year mega deals with a lot of the money up front guaranteed. I think either route you decide to go is totally valid, but can we just get rid of the talk, the yap? Jerry Jones has said that he thinks they'll still reach a deal, but the Commanders are a team that's starting to get bandied about that could possibly swoop in there. The Cardinals. If you ask me, the Eagles could have maybe the best wide receiver trio in the history of the league if they did that. Or, of course, he could go to a team even more in need. Think about maybe the Steelers, even the Jets. Oh, it could be so fun to see him with Aaron Rodgers. That said, I like the idea of hometown discounts. The idea that a player can admit, I am very valuable to this team, but maybe not the absolute most valuable player in the league at my position. I can take, say, 10-15% less than the best contract ever and stay there for longer, be more appreciated. Now, I'll never know what it's like to be an elite NFL player, but that's how I hope that some guys would think about it. And that'll do it for episode 23 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. No guest this week, although I'm hoping to maybe get back next week with Zach Metz of Upgood and Waldo. Things we're planning to do with that episode, looking at some of the best matchups of the upcoming college football season, some players you should keep on Heisman watch, and maybe even giving our own top 25 rankings. We're working through scheduling, but the ideas are pretty solid, and I feel like the context of myself as a retired player and him heading into his senior football season would really give us a lot to go off of. We're TBD on that, but he would be my first repeat guest. Fingers crossed. Remember, you can always feel free to hit me on my socials if you have an idea for me. Instagram and TikTok at The Voice of Tanner. Connect on LinkedIn if you're into that kind of thing. And, of course, leave a like, comment, and share. This has been episode 23 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
And that ball is stroked. Gone! Oh, my goodness, on a frozen rope. Throw in there on one hop. Out! Oh, he hosed him.
Hop steps, great dump off, and a two-hand jam.